Today is the 33rd Sunday of the year. Our gospel text is taken from Luke chapter 21, verses 5 through 19. Jesus is in Jerusalem, and in fact at the temple, and people are admiring the temple. And Jesus sounds a note of warning. Before we examine the text, I'd like to reflect for a moment on a new awakening within our Catholic tradition. The Second Vatican Council, in its major document on the Church, Lumen Gentium, has a simple turn of phrase. It indicates the recovery of a truth that perhaps we'd rather not face. In paragraph 7 of that document, we read, "We are still as pilgrims in a strange land." That notion of pilgrimage or journeying comes up quite explicitly more than a dozen times in the document. It is, for example, the title of chapter 7 of the document. We are a pilgrim people. And in chapter 8, section 7, on Mary, she is the hope of the people, pilgrim people of God. There is something in us all yearns to settle down, to be at home. I'd suggest it is an expression of a fundamental yearning to be in control, to feel secure because we know what's happening. The message of the gospel actually runs into that. We are pilgrims. I would suggest that in our Catholic tradition, the Church entered the Second Vatican Council with what might be called an arrival mentality. We had arrived. We had the answers. It emerged from the Second Vatican Council as a journeying church. Now, that could be a bit slick, but I think there's something to it. Luke tells us that some were speaking of the temple, how it was adorned with beautiful stones and gifts dedicated to God. Herod had renovated the temple, the second temple, which was begun after the Babylonian captivity in the latter part of the 6th century, was a fairly ordinary building until Herod took it into his mind to turn it into a magnificent building. And people were amazed at it. And Jesus says, not one stone will be left on another. Now, we could take this as an indication of an historical event, namely the destruction of the temple in 70 by the Romans. Or we could take it as something more subtle, more profound. The point is not the temple. The point is the kingdom of God. Whether it's destroyed in the year 70 or the year 700 or goes for another 70,000 years is not the point. It's not the kingdom. The church is not the kingdom. It will pass. God in Jesus is the messenger of something deeper than buildings, organizations, rules, laws, doctrines. The temple, with the magnificence of it all, had become a distraction. Maybe the Roman Catholic Church, in its magnificence, has become a distraction. Congar's reference to the Constantinianism evident at the triumphalist opening ceremony of the Second Vatican Council is something to be heeded. Maybe it's an empire model of church, a very this-worldly church that has taken hold and has infiltrated our minds and our consciousness. If that is the case, it could be a major obstacle to our renewal of the church, recovery of the notion of pilgrimage, of journey, and having no lasting city here is a good antidote to that. In chapter 17 of Luke's Gospel, Jesus has announced the kingdom. Let's recall those words. The kingdom of God is not coming with things that can be observed, nor will they say, look here it is, there it is, for in fact the kingdom of God is among you. Now there's quite a profound reality here. The more we recognize the kingdom, the more we will love the world. We'll be detached from its offerings, but we'll have a great compassion and a sense of God's mercy for the world, because we will see it through the eyes of God, who gave his only begotten Son for this world. There have, on occasions within our Catholic tradition, been interpretations of the word world that have been quite misleading, that see the world as the enemy. The world as that which must be shunned. The paradox is the more we enter the kingdom, the more we appreciate the kingdom, the more depth will there be to our feelings of compassion for the world. The kingdom of God is a state of existence. It's not a geographical place or an organization or a building, any of that. It's a state of existence in which God reigns, in which we gain control by surrendering to God, going where God calls us, being God's pilgrim people. So in effect, when Jesus says his rather alarming words in this section of the gospel, he goes on, make up your minds, not to prepare your defense in advance, not to defend, in fact, a worldly kingdom. I will give you words and a wisdom that none of your opponents will be able to withstand or contradict. Now, there's no assurance in these words or in the promise of the Lord that we're going to avoid tragedy or the struggles and the challenges that all human beings must face as part of human existence. We will, in fact, endure these things. And he goes on to say it in quite a hard way. You will be betrayed, even by parents, brothers and sisters, by relatives and friends. They will put some of you to death. You'll be hated by all because of my name. But then he follows it with a promise. And it's not a promise that counters the tragic dimension of life that he's just emphasized. It's a promise that manifests the seminal promise of Sinai. I'll be with you as who I am, shall I be with you. So Jesus says, not a hair of your head will perish. And then finally he ends by saying, by your endurance, you will save your souls. There's an element of hard work involved in this, persistence. It will be easy to be distracted, to build something here that's home, that's solid, that's secure, that protects us, where we're in control. It will take endurance to launch out, to surrender, to be God's pilgrim people.